guys, Kayla here from Lone Pine Koala Sanctuary. All this week we've been talking about different threatening processes that affect wildlife in Australia and around the world. And more importantly, we've been talking about the things that we can do to help. So today we are going to be talking about a really big issue, and that is pollution. Now pollution can come in lots of different forms. I wonder what comes to mind for you when you first think about pollution. You might think about rubbish, trash, like plastic pollution. You might think about air pollution. You might think about pollution in the water. And these are all connected. So one of the big ones that is a really easy one that we can definitely impact with our own daily choices is rubbish and waste, and basically what we do with rubbish and waste and how we dispose of it properly and how we maybe cut down our usage. So a big one is single-use plastics, and these are things that you use one time and then throw them away. And a lot of our food comes wrapped in single-use plastics, things like soft drink and water, things like plastic bags. These are a really big thing, kind of hard to avoid. They're a big part of our life. But did you know that every single piece of plastic that's ever been created since the beginning of when plastic started being made is still around today? And that's because it doesn't break down like some things. It doesn't break down and turn into soil. It just hangs around. So plastic is obviously, an important part of our life in some ways. Things like, oh, there's some cockatoos going by, they're a bit noisy, I might just let them pass. That's better. Things like medical equipment, and even my pen that I'm writing with today has plastic in it. But there are things that we can do to minimize our plastic use. And of course, we can also recycle most plastics. So it is important if you do have some plastic that you put it in the bin, but some things like single-use plastics, plastic bags are a little bit more difficult to recycle. And then even if they don't make it into the recycle bin, if rubbish ends up, on the ground or on the street, it can eventually blow into a storm drain or into a creek. And all of our waterways, our storm drains, creeks, rivers, they all head out into the ocean. So they flow down into the ocean. It's called the watershed. And when that plastic, especially things like plastic bags, enter the ocean, they can be a really big threat to wildlife. Plastic straws, I'm sure you're aware of, and plastic bags as well. So one issue that we do need to be aware of is just our rubbish. So I don't know if you can see on this photo, but it's a picture of a beach, what maybe used to be a nice pristine beach, and it is covered in rubbish that's washed up to shore. Now, that's our rubbish or our waste, but another big aspect of pollution, another cockatoo. There's lots of them around this morning. That's a sulfur-crested cockatoo, they're very noisy. But another thing is air pollution. And a big part of that is something called carbon dioxide, or CO2. Now CO2 is a gas. You can't see it with your eyes, it just looks like air. And it's actually what we breathe out every time we exhale. So we breathe in oxygen, breathe out CO2. And other things produce CO2 as well. Things that are big producers of carbon dioxide is burning coal. So this is a picture of a factory that is burning coal to make something that we all use, which is electricity. Got some light bulbs here. So some of you might have a house that has solar panels on it, which is a little bit different. But if your house doesn't have solar panels, most likely when you flick on a light switch in your house, the energy that causes that light to turn on has been produced by burning coal. And when we burn coal, it releases a lot of CO2 into the atmosphere. Another big culprit for producing carbon dioxide is our cars. So you can see this is a freeway, jam-packed, bumper-to-bumper traffic. And all of these cars, as they burn petrol, they're releasing CO2 from the exhaust. So the stuff that comes out of the back of the car, it's kind of stinky. That's not great for the environment. Of course, some of these might be electric cars, but at the moment, most of our cars do burn either petrol or diesel. So, the issue with CO2, carbon dioxide, more cockatoos, they just can't give me a break today. The big issue with CO2 is that when a lot of it goes into the air, as is happening now because our population has grown, it leads to the warming of the planet or the changing of temperature. So you have probably heard of climate change or global warming. That one flew right over my head. So CO2 goes into the atmosphere and does contribute to climate change, and we are now producing more carbon dioxide than we ever have before, and we are seeing changes, subtle changes, in the temperatures around the planet. Areas are experiencing more flooding, more severe storms, more bushfires, like the horrible bushfire season we just had here in Australia, and also the temperature of the oceans. So normally the oceans go through a cycle of getting warm and cool and warm and cool. But lately, in certain areas, the oceans haven't been cooling off like normal, and that can lead to something called coral bleaching. So you might have heard that this is taking place in coral reefs around the world, and in the Great Barrier Reef as well, where I think they've experienced something around 70% of the reef has experienced coral bleaching. So, definitely an issue, but something that we can definitely control or help with our choices. But first we need to think about, how and why these things are happening. So we talked about pollution in the form of plastics. And I think a lot of the plastic use comes down to convenience. You are thirsty, you're out, you don't have your water bottle with you, you grab a water. You want a soft drink, you get a soft drink at the shops. Sometimes it's really difficult to avoid plastics. So I think that just comes down to convenience for the why. Another big one that we talked about was energy or electricity. With our lights, my little light bulb. And then transportation with our cars. It's hard to write from this angle, but there's a little, very good picture of a car. So, if these are some of the main culprits, these are some of the main causes, what are some things, thinking about each of these whys, what are some things that we can do to help? Starting with plastic. If a big issue is plastic water bottles and bags and single-use plastics, a really easy thing is to just try to get into the habit of always having your water bottle with you, your reusable water bottle, and carrying a reusable shopping bag. I know it can be hard to get into the habit of and hard to remember. I also have made a little rule for myself. If I'm at a shop or out shopping and I buy something and I forgot to bring my reusable bag with me, I will only buy that thing if I can carry it. So that's a little rule that I've made. So we can use reusable. And then if we do have to buy things that are made from plastic, what should we do with those items when we're not using them anymore? When we are done with them and we need to throw them out, where should we put them? I hope that you're thinking to recycle. And you can check on the bottom of the container and see if it has that little triangle symbol with a little number inside to see if it can go in the recycle bin. Some places as well will collect soft plastics and recycle those as well. A lot of supermarkets, a lot of grocery stores, you can save your soft plastics and bring them in to be recycled as well. But the best thing we can do, even better than recycling, is avoiding buying those things in the first place whenever possible, because that means they don't need to get made. If everyone stops needing plastic bags or wanting plastic bags, they'll stop producing plastic bags. Same with plastic bottles and straws. If we don't need a straw, or maybe you can bring along a metal straw, then companies will say, well, people don't want straws anymore, so we're not going to make any more straws, and then we can shift towards a more sustainable future. Energy, our lights and our appliances and things around our house. A really simple thing that we can do. What do you think you should do if you leave the house or you leave a room and you're not in that room anymore? Just turn off the lights. So, simple things like turning off lights and maybe only using the air conditioner when we need. If we can cut down our individual energy use, that's going to mean less energy that needs to be produced by burning coal. And then we also did talk about things like solar panels and wind energy and energy from the ocean, from the tide. So there are also different alternative sources of energy that can be looked into. So things like solar and wind. But, you know, that's not always within our control. You know, maybe when you get a bit older, if you are buying a house, you can have those choices. But for now, little things we can do, turning off the lights. And then our cars, our transportation. I'm sure you can all think of right now an alternative way to get around other than a car. I can already think of quite a few. I'm thinking bicycles, bike, walking, taking the bus, or the train. So using things like biking and walking, which have no carbon emissions, and then public transport or carpooling, things where multiple people can take one car rather than everyone taking their own car. So even though the issue of pollution is a really big one to get your head around, there are lots of really easy little ways that you can be a good guardian and make little small changes. And now we're going to meet an animal that has been impacted by the effects of pollution in the environment. Alright, so this is Anthony Hopkins, and he is one of our splendid or magnificent tree frogs that lives here at Lone Pine. Now, we have been talking about how pollution can impact wildlife. And one of the animals that's probably the most susceptible or most vulnerable to pollution in an environment is our frogs. Now this has to do with their skin. The skin of an amphibian is really different to our skin. Things can pass through it. So they can breathe and drink water through their skin, so their skin can absorb things. But that means if there is any pollution in their waterway, like maybe chemical runoff from a farm nearby, pesticides that have made their way into the water, the frogs are going to be really vulnerable. It can go right through their skin and can make them really sick. Now, for this reason, frogs are what we call an indicator species. That means that they can be an indication or a sign of how healthy a habitat is. If there's a habitat like a creek and all of a sudden all of the frogs get really sick and die off, that's an indicator that there's something not going on in the waterway. Either the temperature has changed or there's some pollution making its way into the river. Now, frogs are also under threat at the moment from a fungal infection. It's called chytrid fungus, and it makes them really, really sick. It's a fungus that grows on their skin, and it's actually killing frogs at a really alarming rate all around the world. And scientists are beginning to think that the spread of this fungus is linked to our changing climate. As areas are getting different temperatures than they've had in the past, this fungus seems to be spreading more and more quickly. And it's definitely a big threat for our beautiful frogs around the world. So the little things that we talked about, how we can lower our own carbon emissions day to day, how we can reduce our waste and our pollution, will make a big difference for these little friends that really need our help.